My name is Willa Adams, and I'm 31 years old. For 3 decades, I've learned that visibility in my family comes with an expiration date, and that date usually coincides with someone else's need. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to Ohio, to the kitchen where I grew up, to a Tuesday afternoon that felt like every other afternoon, except it was the last one where I still believed my family might actually listen. The smell of coffee was doing its usual work, filtering through the afternoon light that came in through those big kitchen windows. My mother was rearranging the fruit bowl for what must have been the 100th time that day. She had this nervous habit of touching things when she didn't want to talk about difficult subjects. Or maybe she was just preparing herself for what I was about to tell them. I still don't know which. My father had the television on. Baseball. There was always baseball. The commentators' voices created this constant background noise that made real conversations nearly impossible. I think that was the point. Or maybe it wasn't intentional. Maybe my father just needed something to fill the silence, because silence meant he'd have to actually participate, he'd have to pay attention, he'd have to care. My sister Jenna was sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone. She owned a boutique called Maple and Lace downtown. It was the kind of store that looked beautiful in photographs, but made no money in reality. I already knew this. I'd heard my mother mention it twice in the weeks leading up to this lunch. My sister looked tired in a way that suggested she hadn't slept well in months. I had called this lunch specifically to make an announcement. I had prepared what I was going to say. I had thought about how to say it. I had imagined their reactions. In my mind's eye, they were all going to be happy for me, proud. I imagined my mother's face breaking into a real smile, not the kind she deployed for company, but the kind she rarely showed at home. I imagined my father turning off the television without being asked. I imagined my sister looking up from her phone and saying something genuine. I was 31 years old and still making these kinds of imaginary scenarios. "I got the promotion," I said, cutting through the ambient noise of the television and the gentle clink of fruit being rearranged in its ceramic bowl. "The one I interviewed for last month. They offered it to me yesterday. I'm moving to Raleigh, North Carolina. I start in 6 weeks." There was a moment of silence, a genuine one. The television continued its play-by-play commentary, but for a second, everyone had stopped moving. My mother glanced at my father, who didn't look up from the screen. Then she turned to Jenna. "How's the boutique doing?" she asked, as if I hadn't spoken at all, as if I hadn't just announced the most significant career achievement of my life so far. My father changed the channel. I felt something shift inside my chest, not breaking, exactly. More like settling, like tectonic plates realigning, like something that had been precariously balanced finally finding its true position. This is what invisibility feels like, I thought. Not absence, just non-acknowledgement, the erasure of significance. The message, delivered without words, that my achievements existed in a space where they couldn't be seen. My mother glanced back at me while continuing to fuss with the fruit. "That's nice, sweetheart. We're happy for you," she said, and the words might as well have been in a foreign language because I could see that she wasn't. She was already calculating something in her mind. I could see it happening behind her eyes. She was thinking about Jenna, about the boutique, about problems that needed solving. The dessert course came later. Cherry pie. My mother had baked it fresh the morning before, and she set it in the center of the table with those careful movements she reserved for things she believed mattered. 3 slices, 4 servings, because Jenna always ate more than she should, and my mother always encouraged this extra consumption, I think because it made her feel like she was providing something meaningful. I reached for the last slice. I don't know why I remember this with such clarity. It's just a piece of pie. It's insignificant in the grand scheme of family dynamics and generational trauma and financial manipulation. But Jenna reached faster. She didn't even look at me. She cut into that last slice with the certainty of someone who knew she'd get it, and she put it on her plate. I withdrew my hand and watched her eat what should have been mine. This was not about pie. That evening, I sent a message to the family group chat. A simple one. Just the dates I'd need help moving, the logistics, the request for availability. 3 family members in that chat. All of them saw the message within minutes. All of them read it. Those little read receipts in the chat told me that much, but none of them responded. I went to my childhood bedroom for the first time in over a year. I hadn't lived here for nearly a decade, but my mother kept the room mostly unchanged, a kind of monument to a version of myself that no longer existed. There was the bookshelf with my old college textbooks. There was the desk where I'd done my homework. And there was the paperweight. I picked it up. Crystalline. Heavy in my palm. I'd won it in high school for perfect attendance in the advanced mathematics program. Someone had engraved my name on the base. Willa Adams. Years of showing up. Years of being present. Years of doing everything right. 10 years of carrying weight. I held it for a long time, not thinking anything in particular, just feeling the physical reality of it. This crystal object that represented effort and achievement and presence, and the irony that I'd carried this weight all my life, showing up, being present, being perfect, and it still hadn't been enough to earn me a slice of pie. Later that evening, I was in my room when I found the envelope. It was on my desk, placed there by my mother at some point during the day. A bank envelope. Inside was a statement showing my first retirement fund. The account had been created through automatic transfers from my salary for the past 3 years. The current balance was $39,000. I had been saving this money without consciously thinking about it. Every paycheck, a percentage had been automatically diverted to the future, to security, to freedom. $39,000. It felt like both everything and nothing at the same time. That's when I made the decision. That's when I knew I couldn't stay in Ohio anymore. Not because I wanted to escape, though I did, but because I needed to understand something about myself that I could only learn at a distance. I needed to know what Willa Adams looked like when she wasn't being perceived through the lens of her family's needs. I needed to know what I was worth when I couldn't be measured against their expectations of what I should provide. I booked the U-Haul that night. When my mother found out, she asked the question I knew she would ask. The question families always ask when they don't understand why someone would dare to leave. "Why do you have to move so far away?" she said, and I answered honestly, because I was still young enough then to believe that honesty might change something. "Because home stopped being home a long time ago," I said. "And it stopped making me home." She didn't understand what that meant. I could see the incomprehension on her face. In her world, home was a geographic location. It was where your family lived. It was a place of obligation and expectation and the constant grinding work of keeping appearances up. It never occurred to her that home might be something you had to build by yourself, in a place where no one expected you to be anything other than what you chose to be. But that's exactly what I did. The drive to North Carolina took 19 hours. I left early in the morning when the light was still gray, that pre-dawn quality that makes the world look like a pencil sketch of itself. The U-Haul was enormous and rented under my name. Every mile I drove felt like a sentence in a story I was finally writing for myself. I played the same 3 albums on repeat. I didn't think about much. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text anyone. The phone sat in the passenger seat, and I watched it not ring. This was a different kind of communication than I was used to. This was silence that meant something. This was absence that held presence. This was the first real boundary I had ever set. And I didn't even know I was setting it yet. I took a rest stop outside of Richmond. I sat in the fluorescent-lit convenience store and drank terrible coffee and realized that I didn't feel obligated to tell anyone where I was. No one needed to know I was safe. No one was waiting to hear from me. This should have felt lonely, but it didn't. It felt like oxygen. It felt like the first full breath I'd taken in years. The condo in Raleigh was on the third floor of a mid-rise building with floor-to-ceiling windows. 850 square feet of absolute emptiness. No furniture yet. No history. No weight. The real estate agent left the keys with me and asked if I wanted the utilities turned on. I said yes to everything. I was going to build this place deliberately. Every single item was going to be something I chose. Every single surface was going to reflect my decision. The first thing I did was unload the U-Haul by myself. I didn't ask for help. I didn't contact my family. The mattress went on the floor. The boxes got organized by function and need. I bought a vacuum and cleaned the space until it looked like the canvas it was meant to be. Then I started building. A simple area rug. Tasteful. Not too bright. A coffee table that I'd found on Facebook Marketplace from someone who was moving out of state. Some bookshelves from IKEA that took me 3 hours to assemble. A desk with an ergonomic chair. These were the tools of my life as I was choosing to build it. Carefully. Deliberately. With respect for the boundaries between what was mine and what belonged to the world. The kitchen was the last room I set up. I bought a tea service. Actual china, not fancy, but beautiful in its simplicity. I set the cups in the cabinet in a specific order. Small to large, handle to the right. These small rituals of organization became a way of talking to myself. A way of saying, you matter. Your preferences matter. The way you arrange your life matters, even if no one else is watching. On the balcony, I placed a lemon tree in a ceramic pot. It was small, barely 2 feet tall, with no fruit yet. But I saw the potential. I watered it carefully, speaking to it in a voice I didn't use around other people. This tree would grow or it wouldn't, and either way, I would keep showing up for it. Either way, the water would be there. The first week at Blue Ridge Biotech was the beginning of understanding something important. I was hired as a systems administrator, managing technology assets for a biotech company. What this meant in practical terms was that I spent my days ensuring that inventory matched reality. When numbers didn't align with physical assets, I investigated discrepancies. When everything balanced, I left it exactly as it was. No adjustments, no creative accounting. Just the truth of what actually existed versus what the spreadsheet said should exist. This is what I was good at. Finding discrepancies, creating order from chaos, establishing systems where none existed, making sure that what people claimed to have actually matched what they actually possessed. I got an apartment key and a badge access to the building. I attended meetings where no one knew who I was yet. I sat in conference rooms and listened to biotech professionals talk about gene sequences and trial results and regulatory compliance. I took notes. I asked clarifying questions. I became, gradually and without fanfare, a known quantity. It was during the first month that Jackson came into my life. He was the building contractor who supervised the renovation of the office's server room. Tall, measured, with the kind of competence that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing and not needing to prove it to anyone else. He noticed me, not in a searching for attention way, but in a way that suggested he actually saw what I was doing, how I moved through the world, how I paid attention to details, how I spoke precisely and didn't waste words. He asked me to get coffee after work one day. I almost said no. I had learned to be suspicious of invitations from men. I had learned to anticipate disappointment. But there was something about his approach that felt different. It didn't feel performative. It felt like a genuine curiosity about whether I might be someone he wanted to know. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became a conversation that lasted until the restaurant politely asked us to leave. He told me about his work in construction management. I told him about my journey from Ohio to North Carolina. He didn't try to convince me to go back home. He didn't minimize my decision to distance myself from my family. He just listened. He asked intelligent follow-up questions. He treated my experience like it mattered enough to understand. On our fourth date, he brought a small notebook. He flipped to a page and showed me a list. He had written it himself, in his careful handwriting. "The rules of this house," it said at the top, and underneath, there were 3 simple guidelines. The first rule: no television during serious conversations. He explained this with the kind of clarity that suggested he had thought about it before. "When we talk about things that matter," he said, "they deserve the full weight of our attention. Not divided attention. Not half attention pulled away by screens. If we're going to say something true, the truth deserves witnesses. It deserves space." The second rule: don't touch the wallet before touching the truth. This one made me pause. He saw the question on my face before I asked it. "Money conversations need to happen separately from emotional truth," he explained. "Sometimes we use finances as a substitute for the harder conversations. We fix the money problem as a way of avoiding the emotional one. These rules say, no, we talk about the truth first. We clean that up. Then we talk about money if we need to." The third rule: warm tea instead of cold liquor. "Tea is communal," he said. "It's warm. It takes time. You can't rush it. You have to sit with it. Alcohol is often about numbing or forgetting. Tea is about presence, about staying awake during difficult conversations, about choosing to be there, even when it's uncomfortable." He watched my face as he read these rules. I think he was gauging whether I thought he was strange or insightful or both. "I write these down," he said, "because boundaries aren't poetic. They're practical. They're systems. They're the scaffolding that lets people have real relationships instead of performative ones." I think I fell in love with him right then. Not the dramatic, movie falling in love kind, the quiet, recognition kind, the kind where you meet someone and realize they speak a language you've been trying to speak your entire life, and you didn't know anyone else could speak it until that moment. Jackson came to my condo for the first time on a Friday night. I had prepared everything carefully. The tea service was on display. The lemon tree was on the balcony, growing steadily. The pillows on my couch were aligned at perfect 90-degree angles. He walked through the space slowly, taking it all in. "You're building something deliberate here," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I'm learning what it feels like to make decisions for myself," I answered. "No one else gets a vote." He nodded like this made perfect sense. He sat on the couch, and I made tea, and we talked until late evening about the architecture of boundaries and the grammar of self-respect. He told me that boundaries weren't cold or rejecting. They were, in their own way, an act of love. Love for yourself first, which made all other kinds of love possible. "Boundaries don't make you cold," he said, and I remember this phrase exactly because I needed to hear it. Boundaries are how you stay warm. Boundaries are the walls that keep the heat inside. Later, when he left, I stood on the balcony and watched the city lights. The lemon tree was invisible in the darkness, but I knew it was there, growing, drawing water from soil, converting sunlight into growth through a process that required no permission from me. It just required my consistent care. This was a new language I was learning. The language of tending to what was yours without apologizing. The language of presence without performance. The language of boundaries that were actually invitations into something deeper, not walls against it. That night, I turned off the notification sounds on my family group chat. I didn't delete the conversation, I just muted it. Let them talk to the void. I had learned, finally, that their words could exist in the world without requiring my reception of them. They could send messages into the digital ether, and I could choose not to hear them. This was not a rejection of love. This was self-preservation. This was me saying, I exist in a space beyond your reach, and that's actually okay. For the first time since I was a child, I went to sleep without waiting to see if anyone would reach out to me. 3 months into my new life, my cousin Ashlyn reached out. She was 24, still lived in Ohio, and had apparently developed a social media presence as an amateur interior design influencer. She had seen a post I made of my kitchen, just a casual photograph of the morning light on the counter, nothing staged, and asked if she could share it. I said yes without thinking. It was a mistake, but I didn't know it yet. The photograph she posted included my full condo. The windows, the balcony, the organized shelves, the neat, beautiful emptiness of a space built by someone who understood the value of negative space. She wrote a caption, "Look what my cousin built, literally solo. She walked away from her family and created a sanctuary. That's the energy we need to manifest into existence." I should have asked her to take it down. I should have set a boundary immediately. But the truth is, there was something seductive about being seen as someone who had successfully left, who had successfully built, who had made a choice and stuck to it. I had spent my entire life being invisible, and suddenly, there was someone, however distant, however adjacent to my life, who was reflecting back at me an image of myself I could actually recognize, someone who was saying, "Look at what you did." 3 days later, my cousin sent me a screenshot. It was a direct message conversation between my mother and my sister. The words still burn when I recall them. My mother had written, "I've already co-signed a $150,000 loan for the boutique. This month the interest payment is due. Maybe Willa has that sitting around. Family should help family. She's obviously doing fine. She doesn't have kids. She probably has money. Ask her." And my sister's response, "Do you think she would? She's always been cold. But the business is actually failing. I don't know if I can keep it open if I can't make this payment. Could you ask her yourself?" My mother, "No. You ask her. She might listen to you. Tell her it's not a big deal. Tell her it's just a loan. Tell her it's family." I remember reading these words and feeling something shift in my chest. Not breaking. Settling again, but differently this time. The way a building settles when the foundation has cracked. They had been planning this. They had been waiting. They had been watching my Instagram posts like they were surveillance footage. They had been calculating what I must be worth based on the evidence of a beautiful apartment. And they had decided that my refusal to help them was actually just coldness. That generosity was something I owed them based on the accident of shared DNA. The message from Ashlyn continued. She had also sent me another screenshot. The decision had apparently been made. They were all coming to Raleigh. All of them. My mother, my father, my sister, my sister's 2 children, Olivia and Mason, ages 6 and 9. They were driving up to my apartment and arriving on a Saturday afternoon, and they expected to be invited inside. This was delivered as a fact, not as a request. This was the kind of family incursion that assumed consent through inevitability. They would arrive, they would expect access to my space, and they would expect me to behave like the Willa they knew from Ohio. The Willa who couldn't say no. The Willa who absorbed the needs of others into her body like an organ. The Willa who served cherry pie without taking a slice for herself. I had 6 days to figure out who I had become. I called Jackson. We had been dating for 3 months, and I had not yet told him about the depth of the fracture between me and my family. I had mentioned it casually, the way you mention someone you know in passing. I had not told him about the retirement fund. I had not told him about the paperweight. I had not told him about the last slice of pie. So I did. I told him everything. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer immediate solutions or trite reassurance. When I was done, he asked a single question. "What do you want to happen?" "I don't know," I said. And this was true. I want them to acknowledge what they're doing. But I also know they won't. I want to set a boundary. But I'm terrified they're going to show up anyway, and I'm going to panic, and I'm going to give them the money just to make them leave. Then we establish the boundary before they arrive, Jackson said. Not as a punishment, not as a rejection of love, as a system for how you can actually interact with them going forward without compromising your own survival. This was the framework I needed. Not, how do I hurt them as much as they hurt me, but how do I organize my life so I can survive their presence without being consumed by it? We spent that evening updating his list of rules. We added new ones specific to financial conversations. No discussing Willa's income or assets unless Willa brings it up. No indirect requests for money. Everything has to be explicit and clear. No guilt-based arguments about what family should do for family. No comparisons between siblings or their respective financial situations. Every request for money comes with clear repayment terms or a clear explanation of why repayment isn't possible. By the time Saturday arrived, I had prepared my space like I was preparing for an interrogation. The tea service was out. I had made small snacks. Nothing fancy, because I didn't want them to feel entitled to more than I offered. The bathroom was clean. The guest room was empty. I did not prepare it with bedding. If they needed to stay, they needed to ask explicitly, and I needed to agree explicitly. Nothing assumed. When they arrived, my mother led the charge. She came in like she was entering a home that partially belonged to her. She went directly to the windows and opened the curtains wider, as if my carefully controlled light wasn't what she would have chosen. She touched the lemon tree on the balcony. She looked through my kitchen. She was performing an inspection, and what she was really looking for was evidence that I had done something wrong, that my choices had been mistakes, that I was punishing them by leaving. My father stood in the living room looking uncomfortable. He kept trying to find somewhere to sit that felt appropriate. My sister stood near the hallway, and her children immediately began opening cupboards they shouldn't have opened. "Can I get you all something to drink?" I asked, deploying the voice I had learned to use at Blue Ridge Biotech. Professional, clear, boundaried. It was during this process while I was making tea that my mother began the interrogation. "So, the salary at this company," she started, and my sister jumped in with, "Are you thinking about buying a place? Or are you going to keep renting?" These were the questions I had anticipated, but what I hadn't anticipated was how vulnerable they would make me feel. Because they weren't actually asking about my life. They were asking me to quantify my worth. They were asking for the numbers that would determine whether I had enough to be asked for money. Jackson had accompanied me that day. He sat on the couch, quiet, watching. And when my mother asked about my 401k, when my sister asked about my mortgage situation, Jackson reached over slowly and moved the television remote from the coffee table. Just set it aside. He didn't make a big gesture about it. He just moved it. My mother saw this. "What we're doing right now," I said, and I was surprised by how calm my voice was, "is discussing my finances like they're public information, like my money is family money, and I need to be very clear about something." I stood up and walked to my bedroom. I retrieved the folder. The bank statement. The account with $39,000 in it. I placed it on the table between us. "This is my retirement fund," I said. "This is money I have been saving automatically from every paycheck. This is my future. This is the difference between independence and dependence. This is what freedom looks like in currency form." My mother was staring at the statement. She looked pale. "The boutique needs $39,000 to cover the interest payment on the loan you co-signed." I continued. And I know this because Ashlyn sent me your text messages. I know that you discussed me like I was a resource to be extracted rather than a person to be consulted. I know that you've been planning this entire visit as a way to extract money from me. You came to my home, and you didn't ask how I was doing. You asked about my assets. You asked what I own. You calculated what you could take. My sister started crying. She said, "The business is failing. I don't know what else to do. I thought you had money. I thought you'd want to help." "I do want to help," I said, and I meant it. I want to help you become independent instead of handing you money that belongs to my independence. I want to help you build a business that actually works instead of subsidizing a failing one with my retirement fund. And I can do that. I can give you advice. I can help you understand where the business is failing. I can help you make a decision about whether to close it or pivot it or save it. But I won't give you my future so you can keep your present intact. My mother started with the guilt. She said the things mothers say. She said, "I thought you were strong enough to handle this. I thought you could help." She said, "Your sister is drowning. How can you call yourself family if you won't help her?" She said, "When did you become so cold? When did you decide your own comfort was more important than your family?" And it was Jackson who answered, not me. He said quietly, "What you're describing as coldness is actually clarity. What you're describing as selfishness is actually self-preservation. And the rules we've established here aren't about rejecting love. They're about the fact that real conversations can't happen when the television is on. Real truth can't emerge when you're trying to grab from the wallet before you've honestly touched the truth." My father had been silent this entire time, but my father reached over and turned off the television completely. He set the remote down on the table. He adjusted the pillow behind him with the kind of precision I recognized. I had been doing the same thing my entire adult life, organizing my environment, trying to create order. He looked at me for more than 2 seconds, the first real acknowledgement I'd had from him in years. "She's right," he said to my mother. "She's absolutely right." My sister's children had stopped exploring. They had gravitated toward me. And the oldest one, Olivia, asked a question that cut through all the adult complexity. "Aunt Willa, what's peace?" And I looked at this 9-year-old girl, and I understood that I was modeling something for her. I was showing her what it looked like to say no, to mean it, to survive the guilt and the shame and the pressure, and to still mean it. So I answered honestly. "Peace," I told her, "is knowing you can say no to someone and they won't punish you for it. Peace is when you're not taking care of someone else's feelings at the expense of your own. Peace is when you're allowed to keep things for yourself without it being called selfish. Peace is boundaries." Later, when they were preparing to leave, and they did leave that evening, in the car they had driven up in, my mother placed an envelope on my kitchen counter. "Empty," she said. "I thought money could hold a family together." And I didn't pick it up. I just acknowledged it existed. I walked them to the door. I set the boundary explicitly. "I want to know you," I said to my mother. "But I want to know you in a way that doesn't require me to disappear. Next time you visit, we talk about other things. We don't discuss money. We don't discuss my salary or my assets. We talk about who you are beyond needing something from me. If you're not ready to do that, then we need to take a break from contact. Not forever, but until you are." The sound of the door closing behind them was the loudest thing that had ever happened in my apartment. The aftermath was silence. For 2 weeks, complete silence. No calls, no texts, no social media activity on their accounts. Which made me wonder if my mother had simply decided to cut off access to digital tools as a form of discipline. I was learning that the opposite of love isn't hate. It's often indifference. And I was discovering that I actually preferred indifference to the constant, grinding pressure of obligation. Jackson was there through the silence. He moved into my apartment gradually, not because I asked him to, but because he started leaving things. A toothbrush, then a change of clothes, then a drawer of his own. It was never a big conversation or a formal commitment. It was just incremental integration. By the end of the silence, he had simply become part of the landscape of my life, the kind of presence that made sense in the morning and felt right at night. We refined the rules. We talked about them extensively. We tested them. We modified them. The rules became less about protecting me from my family and more about establishing what a healthy interaction with anyone might look like. What it means to show up for someone without abandoning yourself. What it means to communicate clearly without softening the message to make it more palatable. What it means to care about someone and still maintain boundaries. Then the calls started. First from my mother. A voicemail that went, "Willa, sweetie, I'm sorry. I didn't understand what you were going through. I want to understand now. Can we talk?" I didn't call her back immediately. I waited 3 days. This was deliberate. This was me teaching both of us that I wasn't going to jump to attention the moment they called. I wasn't going to rearrange my week around their emotional needs. I was going to respond. But I was going to respond on my own timeline. I was going to respond because I chose to, not because I was obligated to. When I did call back, I was clear. "I'm willing to talk," I said. "But not about money, not about the boutique, not about whether I'm coming home. We talk about you, who you are when you're not performing motherhood, what you actually think and feel and want for your own life. If that's too difficult, then I'm not available to talk yet." There was a long silence on the other end. Then she said, "Willa, I'm trying here. I'm trying to understand what you need from me." "You need to understand what you need from you," I replied. "And you need to understand that my life now is separate from yours. It's not that I don't love you. It's that I love myself more, and that has to be the foundation of everything else." The conversation lasted 45 minutes. We talked about her loneliness, about how she had defined her entire identity through taking care of other people, and now that her children had grown, she felt like she didn't have a purpose. She talked about the pressure she felt to keep the family together, to make sure no one struggled, to be the safety net for everyone else's problems. She talked about how, when I left, she took it as a personal rejection, as evidence that she had failed. I listened. I didn't argue. I didn't try to fix anything. I just bore witness to her pain, because witnessing doesn't require you to take ownership of it. It doesn't require you to make it better. It just requires you to see it, to acknowledge that it exists. "I need you to hear something," I said when she was finished. "I didn't leave because you failed. I left because I was suffocating. I left because I couldn't become myself in a space where I was expected to be everything to everyone. That's not your fault. That's not a reflection of your failure as a mother. That's just what happened. And I had to choose between staying and disappearing, and I chose to stay alive." My mother cried. I didn't tell her not to cry. I didn't comfort her. I just let her cry, and I stayed on the line. I was present without being responsible. I was there without being implicated in her emotions. A week later, another call came. From my sister. She had spent that week, she told me, trying to fix the boutique on her own. She had cut staff. She had reduced inventory. She had looked at the numbers honestly for the first time since she opened it. And she had realized that the business wasn't viable, that no amount of money would save it because the fundamental model wasn't working. "I'm going to close it," she said, and I could hear something like relief in her voice. I know I was supposed to want to save it. I know Mama wanted me to save it. but I think closing it might actually be the smartest thing I can do. I think so too, I said. And that's incredibly brave. That's the kind of clarity that only comes when you stop looking for external rescue and start looking at reality. Willa, she said, and her voice got very quiet. I'm sorry I treated you like a solution to my problem. I'm sorry I didn't ask you how you were. I'm sorry I used you. And here's the thing about apologies. Sometimes they don't fix anything. They just acknowledge that something was broken. And sometimes that acknowledgement is enough to let you move forward differently. Not the same as before. Different. Lighter. More honest. I accept your apology, I said. And I'm willing to have a real relationship with you if you're willing to have one with me. But it's going to look different than it used to. It's going to have real boundaries in it. And those boundaries are going to include things like, you can't use me as a financial safety net, and you can't use me as a therapist. We have to be actual sisters instead of one person taking care of another person. I'd like that, she said. I think I'd like that more than what we had before. It took a month for everyone to stabilize into this new arrangement. My mother started therapy. My father retired fully and started reading. Actual books, not just allowing ESPN to be on in the background. My sister closed the boutique and found a job in healthcare administration that paid consistently and didn't require her to mortgage her future. And I continued building my life in Raleigh with Jackson, with my lemon tree, with my tea service, with my rules that were actually just ways of saying, I matter. My well-being matters. My future matters. Then came the real test. My mother called and asked if she could visit. Not with my father and sister. Just her. Alone. She said she wanted to see my space. She said she wanted to understand how I had managed to build something so beautiful in such a short amount of time. I said yes. But I was clear about the conditions. We don't discuss money. We don't discuss my job or my salary. We don't discuss why I left. We talk about real things. We talk about who you are. And if you can't follow those boundaries, the visit ends and you go home. She agreed. And when she arrived on a Saturday morning, she was different. She wasn't performing. She wasn't inspecting. She was just present. We made tea in the china cups. We sat on the balcony. We watched the lemon tree move in the breeze. And my mother said something I will never forget. I spent 30 years trying to be the person everyone needed, she said. And I'm just now realizing I erased myself in the process. I don't actually know who I am anymore. And what you've done here. She gestured around the apartment. This is what I should have done years ago. You built yourself while you still could. You saved yourself. I'm jealous of that. And I'm sorry I made it feel like saving yourself meant abandoning me. I didn't say anything for a long time. I just let the moment exist. We drank our tea. We watched the city. We sat in silence that was actually companionable rather than tense. And when she was ready to leave that evening, she didn't push me for promises I couldn't make. She didn't ask me when I'd be home. She asked if I was happy, and I said yes, I am. And she said, good. I'm glad. I'm going to work on being happy too. This is when I understood something fundamental about boundaries. They're not about pushing people away. They're about creating enough space that you can actually see each other clearly, that you can actually interact as whole people instead of fragmented versions of yourselves that only show up in response to need. For the first time, I called my family instead of waiting for them to call me. We talked every week. We didn't discuss money. We discussed ideas. We discussed dreams. We discussed things that didn't fit in a spreadsheet or a financial statement. And our relationship, for the first time, started to feel like something I chose instead of something I was obligated to manage. Jackson watched this transformation with the kind of quiet satisfaction that suggested he had known this was possible all along. He was right. Boundaries weren't the end of love. They were the beginning of it. Real, honest, mutual love, the kind that doesn't require you to disappear. 6 months after that weekend when my family arrived at my apartment expecting extraction, I was watering the lemon tree, and I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The tree was covered in tiny green lemons, dozens of them. They were small and hard and absolutely perfect. The tree had been consistently tended. The water had come. The sunlight had come. The soil had been rich. And in response to those consistent conditions, the tree had done what trees do. It had produced fruit. I stood on that balcony in the Raleigh evening, with the golden light falling at that perfect angle where it made everything look like it was glowing from within. And I understood something about myself that I needed to understand. I had done this. Not just the tree. The entire transformation. I had watered what was mine. I had stopped watering what belonged to other people. I had stopped trying to make other people's seeds grow and had instead focused on the seeds inside myself. That autumn, my sister came to visit for the first time without our parents. She brought Olivia and Mason. She hadn't asked for permission. She had texted and asked if the timing worked for her. That's the question you ask when you're not assuming entitlement. That's the question you ask when you've accepted that someone else's boundary doesn't mean you've been rejected. It means you've been respected. I made something I hadn't made since I was a child. A cherry pie. A small one, just 6 inches across. I made it for myself, which was the revolutionary act. I baked it on a Thursday evening, and when it came out of the oven, it was perfect. The crust was golden, the filling was deep burgundy, and when I cut into it, the filling held its shape instead of running everywhere like it had always done when my mother baked them. I cut 4 slices, one for my sister, one for Mason, one for Olivia, and one for me. And I ate that slice slowly, deliberately, without guilt. Without looking to see if someone else wanted it. Without apologizing for taking what was mine. And it tasted better than any slice of pie I had ever had in my entire life. My niece watched me eat that first slice and said, "Are you happy, Aunt Willa?" "Yes," I said. "I'm very happy." "Why?" she asked with the kind of sincere curiosity children have before they learn that some questions are supposed to be awkward. "Because I'm allowed to be," I answered. That's the thing I learned. Happiness is a choice, but you have to be allowed to choose it. And I wasn't allowed to before. So I left to go somewhere where I could be. Mason, who was younger, said, "Mom says you're brave." "Your mom is kind to say that?" I replied. "But I think I'm just honest. Bravery is a thing people do when they're afraid. I was just tired of being afraid." After they left, I stood in my kitchen, looking at the pie plates, 4 of them, one for each person who had chosen to be present. I thought about the last slice of pie in Ohio. I thought about the hand reaching faster. I thought about the retraction. And I thought about how much time I had spent trying to earn access to things that should never have required earning in the first place. How much energy I had spent making myself small so that other people could feel comfortable with how much space they took up. Jackson came home that evening, and I showed him the remaining pie. He looked at it and smiled. "You made this for yourself?" he said. It wasn't a question. "I made this for me," I confirmed. "That's new." He cut himself a slice and made tea. The warm, ceremonial kind of tea that we both understood by now was about presence rather than caffeine. And we sat in my apartment with the city lights beginning to emerge in the distance, and we didn't talk about anything in particular. We just sat. We existed. We let each other take up space. The weeks that followed were the building of a new kind of normal. My family settled into a rhythm with me that didn't require constant extraction or constant performance. We talked weekly. We visited occasionally. We maintained boundaries, and those boundaries made everything better instead of making everything worse. My mother, in particular, transformed. She started taking classes at a community college. She was studying photography. She sent me pictures of what she was learning: composition, light, shadow, the way a photograph could tell a truth without words. And in those photographs, I started to see the person she had been before she became the woman who had raised me. A woman with her own curiosities, her own dreams, her own way of seeing the world. "I wish I had done this earlier," she said in one of our calls. "I wish I had understood that giving myself permission to be myself wouldn't hurt you. I thought all my sacrifice was love, but now I realize it was just erosion. I eroded myself into nothing, and then I wondered why I felt so empty." "You understand it now," I told her. "That's what matters." At work, I had been promoted. I was now managing a team of 15 people who worked in systems administration. And one of the first things I did in that position was establish boundaries for the team. We didn't respond to emails after 6 p.m. We didn't work weekends. We took our vacation. We set clear expectations about what people could ask of each other versus what they couldn't. And what happened was remarkable. Productivity didn't decrease. It increased. People worked more efficiently when they weren't trying to do the work of 10 people. People collaborated better when they weren't exhausted. People stayed in roles longer because they weren't burning out. I had learned something that most organizations don't seem to understand. Boundaries create capacity. When you stop bleeding out your resources, you actually have more resources to offer. 6 months after the pie baking evening, I received a call from my father. He wanted to visit, alone. He had never asked to do this before. My father had always operated as part of the family unit, following my mother's lead. So when he called, I was curious about what had prompted this shift. He drove up on a Friday evening. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time. Not through the lens of what he wasn't providing, but just as a person. A 60-year-old man who had spent his life disappearing into television and work, and the easy comfort of not having to participate in difficult emotions. We ordered takeout and sat in my kitchen. He looked around at the space I had built and said, "You've made something beautiful here, Willa, and I'm sorry I missed so much of you while you were doing it." "You're here now," I said. "That's what matters." "Is it?" he asked. "Does it really matter this much if you only show up at the end?" This was new. This was vulnerability from a man who had spent his life avoiding it. So I answered honestly, "I think it matters more than you think," I said. "Because showing up now means you're choosing to show up. It means it's not obligation. It means you actually want to be here." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "When you left, I realized I had spent 30 years leaving. I just didn't go anywhere. I was present in body but absent in every other way. And watching you set your boundaries with your mother made me realize that I could have set boundaries too. That I could have said no to disappearing into baseball and television and work. That I could have been a different kind of father." "You're being a different kind of father now," I pointed out. "You're being a father who asks questions, who shows up intentionally, who wants to understand me as a person instead of just a daughter. That's what matters." Before he left on Sunday, he asked if I wanted to come home for Thanksgiving. Not as a visit where I was filling a role or managing expectations, but as a person visiting family. He said, "Your mother wants to cook. Your sister wants to see you. And I want to watch you with your niece and nephew and understand what you've been trying to tell us about what it means to be a whole person." I said I would come. And I meant it, because it was finally something I was choosing instead of something I was being forced to do. The autumn turned to winter, and the lemon tree on my balcony dropped its leaves in preparation for dormancy. The lemons that had hung so perfectly in the summer fell, but not before I picked them and made lemon curd and lemon cake and lemon tea. I filled my apartment with the smell of citrus and reminded myself that abundance comes from consistency, that you get fruit in autumn only if you've watered in summer, that you build a sustainable life not through grand gestures, but through the small daily choices to protect what's yours and tend to what matters. Jackson and I talked about getting married, not as something we had to do, but as something we wanted to do. We talked about what marriage would look like with our rules in place. We talked about what it would mean to build a life together without losing the individual lives we had each built. We talked about the possibility of children and about what we would want to teach them about boundaries and self-respect and the architecture of healthy relationships. And on a cold November evening, exactly 1 year from the day I had loaded my U-Haul and driven away from Ohio, I sat in my apartment and looked back at the woman I had been and the woman I had become. I thought about the person who had reached for the last slice of pie and had her hand retracted. I thought about the person who had saved $39,000 without knowing what it meant. I thought about the person who had spent her entire life believing that her worth was measured in what she could provide to other people. That person still exists somewhere inside me. She's not gone. She's just integrated. She's been assimilated into the woman who now knows that worth is inherent, that it doesn't need to be earned, that it doesn't need to be proved through financial sacrifice or emotional labor or the constant work of making other people comfortable. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. "I'm coming home for Thanksgiving," I said, "and I want to bring Jackson. I want him to meet all of you in a context where everyone's just being themselves. No performance, no extraction, just family." "That would be wonderful," my mother said, and I could hear in her voice that she meant it, that she wasn't performing, that this was genuine. When I hung up the phone, I walked to the balcony. The lemon tree was bare now, all its fruit harvested, all its leaves dropped. It looked like it was sleeping, like it was gathering energy for the spring. And I understood that this is what boundaries look like sometimes. They look like dormancy. They look like the clearing away of everything that isn't essential. They look like death before resurrection. But underneath the apparent emptiness is the preparation for growth. I made myself a cup of tea in one of my china cups. I sat on the couch with the perfect pillows. I looked at the crystal paperweight on the shelf, the one I had retrieved from my childhood bedroom and brought with me to Raleigh as a reminder of all the weight I had carried, and I finally understood what it really meant. It wasn't the weight of 10 years of showing up. It was the weight of a choice, the weight of the decision to love myself enough to leave, the weight of the responsibility to maintain boundaries, even when it was hard, the weight of having to disappoint people in order to save yourself, the weight of clarity, the weight of truth, and I was strong enough to carry it. I settled back into my couch and let the city lights of Raleigh wash over me through the windows. Somewhere out there, my family was beginning to understand what I had been trying to tell them. Somewhere out there, my sister was building a life that actually fit her. My mother was discovering who she was beyond the role of caretaker. My father was learning how to be present without the television as a shield. And somewhere inside myself, I had finally answered the question that had haunted me since I was a child. I had answered it by leaving. I had answered it by building. I had answered it by setting boundaries. I had answered it by choosing myself. The question was, am I worthy of my own love? And the answer, I had finally discovered, was yes. 1,000 times yes. Not because I had earned it, but because I had chosen to believe it. And that belief, that single act of choosing to believe in my own worth, had changed everything. When I closed my eyes that night, I wasn't waiting for anyone to call. I wasn't preparing for anyone's needs. I wasn't practicing a story for anyone else. I was just here, present, whole, complete. Not because my family had validated me, but because I had validated myself. This is what peace feels like, I thought as I drifted towards sleep. This is what it means to come home to yourself. And for the first time since I was a very small child, I was truly at home.